Hi guys, welcome back. My name is Shayda and today we are going to paint a house in watercolor. Architectural paintings are sentimental and they're much easier than they appear. You just need a little patience and a few of my tips and tricks. What's up guys? Today I'm super excited to share this process for home portraits with you. We're going to go through everything. I'm using the example of this little blue bungalow that I found on Google Images, but we're going to take you through the process from the initial graph paper sketch to the trace to the transfer and the final painting so that you feel really confident with this process, so that you could paint any house that's in your life. And the reason you would paint a house is it's a great way to honor a family property or cottage that's been in the family, but it's also nice for friends that may have just bought their first home. It makes a nice gift at a baby shower or a housewarming, things like that where people are starting out. Painting houses has also become big business for watercolorists, so if you are a working artist, consider making this part of your repertoire. So I am starting today with graph paper. I really recommend doing this on graph paper first. It is probably the most important supply we will use today. Of course, I've got a pencil. I like a mechanical pencil. I've got an eraser nearby, and then I am using a Pigmamicron. The 08 nib is a larger one. We don't need a lot of fine detail today. I've also got a couple pieces of tracing paper, graphite transfer paper, and it doesn't hurt to have some washi tape. Okay, so here's the printout of my Google house. So the thing that we are looking for when you're taking a photo of the home that you're going to paint, because you do want a photo, is that it's taken from directly in front so that you have a very two-dimensional image. There's not a lot of perspective going on here. Of course, the roof is on a bit of a slant and the driveway is coming towards us, so there's a bit of foreshortening, but otherwise, everything is pretty much dead on facing the viewer. And if this is your first architectural painting / drawing, I think that's a good place to start. So take a photo of the home and try to be standing directly in front. Now we're going to start the drawing, and I always break the house down into blocks. Everything is rectangles, maybe a few triangles. So we have the portion with the garage. It's a big rectangle. Then we come over here and we have the rest of the house, which is a longer rectangle, and it is up higher on the graph paper because it is back further. So we're using the graph paper to help us with our perspective and also to keep everything straight. Speaking of straight, I am going to start doing the details on the garage. Sometimes it's just nice to do something that's not hard. I always like to gain confidence by doing what I'm confident in, and right now that's the details on the garage. I know that the garage takes up most of the bottom part of this square. I also can draw in the little double door over here, and it's about the same height as the garage. Then I'm going to jump over and draw in the pillars. Again, everything is rectangles and squares, even though these pillars are on a bit of an angle at the top. To begin, I'm just going to draw two rectangles that are the same size, about 1.5 squares on the graph paper. Then I'll divide them, and then we can add that angled bit in. So just breaking things down and drawing guides for yourself. Now I want to start thinking about the roof. It's a little more complicated, but not too bad. So I'm going to mark center here above the garage, and we'll start with that part of the roof. I'm going to pick a spot where the peak will be, and that allows me to make a nice perfectly straight and perfectly even roof. And I'm just sort of guessing. I can always change it if the roof doesn't look high enough. The peak of the second section of roof is just to the right of the garage. So we're always looking, if this section of the house starts here, this one stops here, use the photo as your guide. So I've placed that peak just to the right of the garage section of the house, and then I'm going to draw in the rest of the roof. And as soon as I do that, I can see that I've got a little too much roof. So I want to lower it, and I've done that with the ruler, and then I need to lower the peak of that second peak. Anyways, I'm working it out. The graph paper is super helpful. And then once I'm pretty happy with my pencil sketch, I'll start going over it with my Pigma Micron. It's a good idea to use a little ruler, especially if you have a small clear ruler. You can get those at most art stores or even dollar stores. They're really helpful for a project like this. And not everything needs to be perfect. If you're using a ruler for everything, you're going to drive yourself nuts. The charm of a watercolor house portrait is that it should be a little bit, I know you know what I'm going to say, a little bit perfectly imperfect, but that really is what makes it so charming. Just a tip about the roof angle. At the top here, I'm going to draw a straight line down, and then at the bottom corner, a straight line up. And now you can see that there are 2 full squares in between here, and then I'll use a ruler to draw in that angle. Now the amount of squares is not important. 2 seems good, but I just want to make sure that I'm using the exact same amount of area on the other side. And graph paper means you don't have to measure. I can just say it's 2 squares and 2 squares. Now the house is really coming together, and I'm happy with the look of it. At this point, you might want to add a little landscaping and maybe a bit of a driveway. I'm just putting like 2 little broken lines for the driveway and some messy scribbly trees in behind, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the painting portion of this. A few details with the landscaping can really make this come to life, so don't be afraid to add your mom's favorite flowers if you're doing a home portrait for her. And at this point, we can lay the tracing paper over and start carefully tracing the house. This is the portion where you may want to use a ruler the most. I did for a number of lines, but again, you don't need that ruler for everything. You'll drive yourself nuts. So there, my trace is done. I'll take away the initial sketch. The trace looks good. A nice tip is to flip it over and make sure everything still looks good when you're looking at it in reverse. If it does, then I would say you're good to go. And so today I'm going to be painting this on a really nice big piece of cold pressed Canson watercolor paper. I just think these look so sophisticated when there's a lot of negative space around them. It's a really nice look. And if you're selling these, I think a big piece of paper goes a long way. I'm just going to mark where my horizon line is, where the line of the yard or the back of the house is there. And then I'm going to measure it and mark it on both sides of the page. It was about 10 centimeters up. And then I'm going to draw a straight line across. I want to make sure that the house is sitting straight on the page. There's nothing worse than a crooked house. And now I can line that up using my tracing paper, and I know, okay, that horizon line is straight to the paper. I'll take my graphite transfer paper, place it dark side down underneath the tracing paper, and I just take a nice sharp pencil. Mechanical pencils are great for this, and go over everything. It's okay to use a ruler for portions of this as well. Don't be afraid to reach for it for the roof lines especially. We'll lift that up, and the transfer looks pretty good. It's okay if the transfer lines are dark. A few of those lines showing through the light watercolor paint can actually be a good thing and help with the overall design. I noticed here that I had not brought my garage down far enough in front of the other portion. That was just something I messed up in the trace, so I'm just fixing that up there. And then I'm going to start mixing up my watercolor paints. And I'll just show you what paints I'm using. I've got a little pocket set from Derwent that I'm going to use today. I've got 2 different round brushes, 2 glasses of clean water, one for cool colors, one for warm colors. I don't think you need a lot of different colors of paint for this. A limited palette will suit you fine. It's good to have paper towel for blotting, and then we can jump right in. All the supplies, again, if you are wondering about any of them, are listed in the video description below. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm starting with what I think is really easy, which is the black roof. The only thing about the black roof that I really want to mention is that you don't just want to paint dark black over the entirety of it. it will just look too dark and dead and blah. So you need to have a little light in there. So what I'm doing is I've got a light black, lots of water in there, and you can see me moving that lighter paint around the roof and making sure I go right to the edges. And it's okay if some areas are a little lighter and some are a little darker. It doesn't even really matter what areas are dark and what are light. I'm tending to go a little darker around the edges. You just want to make sure that you're using the watercolors to your advantage and that you get some variation in the color even though it is black. And here I've got a nice wet light black painted in, and then I'm coming in with some darker, more pigmented paint, and I'm just letting it seep out into that wet area, and I let the watercolors do their thing, and it's gonna look nice and natural. Okay, with the roof done, I've got a bit of gray here, really light gray, and I'm just adding a bit of that to the porch, and I'll also do the sidewalk and a bit of the driveway, and I just kind of let it end off wherever the brush doesn't hit, and it gives a nice natural painterly quality to sort of the driveway there. But at this point, the house painting becomes so much fun. It's like a coloring book image. You've transferred it, you've perfected it on the graph paper and the tracing paper, and then by transferring it, you've given yourself almost a coloring book image that you just get to color in or paint in. And so this portion I find really fun and really relaxing. And I've mixed up a nice gray blue. I wasn't super into that green, and since this isn't a real house, well, not to me, since it's just a house off Google that I'm using as an example, I thought I'd like to make it blue. And just a tip for when you're mixing the color of the house, if you're painting flowers a lot like I am, you might use bright colors. Well, houses tend not to be bright colors, so make sure to add a little gray, or if it's green, make sure it's an olive green or a mustard. Just the house colors are so different than what we see in nature. And now that that is done, I am just drawing some squares onto the garage here, and I'll do them in pencil, and then it's kind of, the garage comes together with a little bit of those pencil lines and a bit of gray paint, and I'm just kind of outlining every little square. It's that style of garage that has the squares. And so it's very, very light paint, and I think that light paint really works and just brings out that hint of detail without being too heavy. So keep it light. And then the lanterns, I'm using an extra pigmented black. They're just going to be jet black, no variation there. And then I think it's about time that we start painting these windows, even though I'm a little scared to do it. And there's lots of options when you go to paint the windows. Now, because these ones are sort of under a porch roof, like that roof comes forward over this area where the windows are, I can't have like a sky reflected in the windows. It wouldn't make sense. So I'm going to paint them black for the most part. And I just, again, like the roof, I don't want them to just be dead jet black. There's a sort of a lighter area in the bottom corner, and that just gives, I think, a more realistic look. Then I'm coming in with a bit of a darker, more gray blue just on the very tip of my brush, and I'm adding lines. I thought it would be fun to make it look like the house was wood. I guess that would be like wood plank or something. Anyways, it's important, I think, to follow the house as it is if you're painting a real house portrait. But for me, as I took this off Google, I just thought, oh, it would be so pretty if there was brick, if it wasn't plaster, or if there was shingles. And so I'm adding that detail. The more little details you can add, I think the more it brings the house to life. But it's also not about making them perfect. You can see these lines are broken, they're curving, they're very perfectly imperfect, but that's what makes it look cool. If they looked straight, it wouldn't look natural. And then I want to darken this portion of the house because it is under the porch as well. So I'm just adding a little bit of a watery paint in a darker gray blue to make this portion of the house recede a little bit, because it does need to recede. Otherwise, it's going to look like it's part of the garage in the front there. And we can also add a little bit of that darker paint under the peaks of the roof to show that they are coming out forward and casting a little bit of a shadow there as well. Whenever I get the crazy idea in my head to paint something on the channel that is not really in my wheelhouse, I always do research online and I look at Pinterest and Instagram to get inspired. And one of the accounts on Instagram that really inspired me as far as houses go was Lindsay McCall Art. And she does some really interesting artwork, and houses are just part of what she does. But I did want to give her a shout out because I definitely was obsessing over all her house paintings when I was trying to get ideas for how I would tackle this project today. So check her out and give her a follow. Just finishing up these windows, it's a good idea to paint some of the windows a different color because they would naturally reflect something differently. And then I'm jumping up here and adding a bit of foliage in behind the house. This is a great way to sort of, I guess, make the piece look a little more finished. You can kind of enclose your house, and it's really simple to do a little bit of stippling. You get a lot of paint on your brush. I'm going to do a tree here so that you guys can really see what I'm doing. You get a lot of paint on your brush and you allow the paint to sort of seep out through the tip, and you're doing this fast stippling motion. Now for a single tree like I'm doing in the front yard here, you want the all the bursts of foliage to sort of be moving upward. They all look like they're sort of going up towards the top of the page. I'm starting small at the bottom near the tree trunk, and then they're getting bigger and the bursts are getting more wild and watery as I move up and out. And I do not want to create a perfect circle or oval. The tree shape should be a little wrong. It would never be a perfect, egg shape or something like that. So make sure that there's a little wisp going off that way and a branch going off this way. Now, while I'm working in green, I'm going to use the same technique to make some shrubs in the front yard here. And the same for them. They shouldn't look too perfect. One side should be a little taller. And then I'll use a bit of brown, and I'm doing a very simple straight tree trunk, nothing tricky about that. And once the tree trunk is done, I'll mix up a slightly darker brown, and I'll come in and sort of add a little bit of mulch to these gardens at the front of the house. Okay, and then we are quickly approaching the end of this piece. Just for those of you that are wondering, this took me about 4.5 hours to complete from start to finish. But all I need to do is paint in the grass, and I'm using a technique that we've used many times for the roof and everything really, and that is that some areas of this green are going to be darker and some I'm going to bleed out with more water and make them lighter, so that even though there's no detail here, that the paint doesn't look dead on the page. You can see it's really watery as it comes toward the viewer in the front, and it's a little darker up near the horizon line. And that's such a simple thing to do, but it really adds a nice sophistication to your piece. And I'm just putting some more pigmented green and letting it seep out into that wet area. And I think it looks really pretty, and it really finishes the piece. I'm going to add a little more green on this side of the yard. I like the grass green. Did you see what I just did? Oh my God. Okay, of course I'm doing this in voiceover, so I already knew that was gonna happen, but right at the end, I splashed paint on my page, which is so annoying. But all I could do is just keep going, and what I do when that happens, if I don't have a clean brush handy to sop the paint up with, I just leave it, and then I erase it, and I scrape it a bit with a sharp knife, and I erase even more. So I sort of sand off a layer of the paper, and that's how I get rid of that kind of mistake. I am just finishing this green. I'm sort of moving the green of the grass up into the tree to really enclose this side of the house and to create some depth within the piece. And yeah, and that's about it. I'll add a little bit of detail to the grass, and then I am all done. I'm super happy with this. This was actually my first house painting, and now I need to tackle my parents' century home. Definitely come over to my Instagram if you'd like to see how that project turns out. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for lots more videos like this one.